To understand what Russia did in the 2016 election, those made-up false stories designed to have a politically useful effect on their audiences, we came to realize that that was part of what Russia did in their attack on us. It wasn't the biggest part of what they did, but it was an alarming thing that they radically upscaled over the course of 2015 and 2016, this sort of counterfeiting of the news process. And so that became part of our national discussion about what Russia had done, what Russia had sort of harnessed to try to interfere in our election in order to benefit Donald Trump. And the term that was most easily and specifically and conveniently applied to that phenomenon, the phrase fake news, because these were in fact fake news stories generated for political purposes, that phrase fake news was soon adopted by President Trump and his campaign, and then ultimately by all Republicans, basically so that that phrase became theirs. And the way they used it, the phrase fake news, no longer described the thing for which that phrase had been coined. It no longer described this very specific aspect of the foreign interference in our election. The Trump campaign and ultimately Republicans converted that phrase, so instead it would be used as an epithet against all journalists, right? Any real journalism, particularly journalism critical of President Trump, would be fake news. It was also just an easy undermining epithet for all types of reality-based journalism. All real media is fake news. All journalism is fake news. All reporters do fake news. And that had two effects. I mean, number one, it undermined journalism and the whole idea of objective facts being the basis for political discussion and policymaking. But it also took away that phrase for a specific and legitimate use. I mean, them taking that phrase, fake news, and using it this new way sort of rendered mute, rendered kind of linguistically impossible any analysis of that very real, very specific initial problem for which that phrase was coined. That's what they did with fake news. That is what they're doing now with the word corruption.
Everything to me is about corruption. I do care about corruption. 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 We are looking for corruption. Tremendous corruption. Beyond corruption. We are looking at corruption. So again, this doesn't pertain to anything but corruption. And that has to do with me. I don't care about politics. I don't care about anything. But I do care about corruption.
You know, corruption is actually a real thing. I mean, corruption has a specific meaning in English usage. I mean, if a U.S. president intervenes in the U.S. government selection process for the next venue for the G7 conference and insists that the best venue in America for holding that conference is his own property, which of course would result in him being paid by all those foreign governments and the U.S. government for him hosting the G7 conference at his place, I mean, that is corruption. If, for example, the president intervened in the decision-making process around whether the FBI's headquarters would be rebuilt on site in Washington or moved out into the suburbs. If he changed the U.S. government's decision-making process on that subject in such a way that would result in a better business environment and less competition for his own Trump Hotel, which is right across the street from that construction site, I mean, that would be corruption. Corruption is an actual thing. We don't even need to make up fake examples to show the worst and most blatant corruption you could possibly imagine from a U.S. president. We've lived through all these already. I mean, diverting the vice president's trip to Ireland so he had to stay on the other side of the frigging island from where all his meetings were, just so U.S. taxpayers would have to put up the vice president and his entourage and the Secret Service and all the rest at the president's west coast of Ireland resort while Vice President Pence took his east coast of Ireland meetings. I mean, plus paying all the extra money to shuttle him back and forth across that entire country, back and forth across that entire island, simply so the money paid for that trip from the U.S. taxpayers would find its way into the president's pocket. I mean, that is corruption. Corruption is a real thing. That's a word that has a real and specific, useful meaning. Similarly, the corruption of American foreign policy, so that instead of serving the national interest, U.S. foreign policy is diverted to serve the president's personal political ambitions, that is a form of corruption. And the reason we're having these impeachment proceedings now is because the president has now been caught for that. Now that there is no question, by the president's own admission, by the evidence provided by the White House, by one and now it looks like two whistleblowers who appear to have nailed him for doing that, now that the president is being impeached for doing that, the president's response is just to say the word corruption over and over again. Corruption, 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 corruption. All I care about is corruption. I'm here to work on corruption. I'm not corrupt. You're corrupt. Joe Biden's the corrupt one. Nancy Pelosi's the corrupt one. Impeach me? Impeach Adam Schiff. He's the corrupt one. All I care about is corruption. All these people coming after me, they're corruption. When it comes to the accusation that he has been flinging against Vice President Joe Biden, the broader circumstance there is that Joe Biden, as vice president, was the American government's point person working with the government of Ukraine to try to combat actual corruption in that country. And so therefore, you've now got the president and his allies pointing at Joe Biden and yelling, corruption, corruption. Now, look how close he is to that corruption in Ukraine. He's the corrupt one. Can't you tell? I mean, it's the same dynamic that we went through around this phrase, the fake news, right? The media tries to expose and fact check these fake stories that are being circulated to try to benefit Trump. Well, that effort itself, that fact checking effort, that's fake news. Oh, you're the fake news. Everything you do is fake news. The whole news media is fake news. I mean, what they're trying to do is take this word away from their accusers to try to make any reference to the president's corruption seem like a sort of muddy crossfire where there's allegations of corruption on all sides. And who can say? Right? As with their adoption and perversion of that phrase, fake news, they are trying to make us basically linguistically incapable of characterizing the very real and very simple thing for which the president is being impeached. Right? The president saying corruption, corruption, corruption as if he is a force for anti-corruption now. It seems hilarious to hear him say it, given what he's been like as president and given what he's being impeached for right now. But I do believe that we are on a very short time frame now before which we will not be able to really use the word corruption anymore to talk about this scandal for which the president is being impeached. Because by his sheer repetition of it and the adoption of it by his supporters and by the conservative media for it to mean the opposite of the real English use of that word, the word will become meaningless, will become something that is no longer available to us. It will become something that means both its real meaning and its opposite. It'll be an unspeakable, unusable part of this political drama.
His appointees are incompetent. His rhetoric is ridiculous and ludicrous. He's a vengeful, petty, spiteful man, and he's so vain he has a dang spray tan. Impeach him. Now he's got the nuclear codes. The nuclear codes, this ain't a joke anymore. Impeach him. The Donald is a dangerous man. Let's use the Constitution to take a stand. Impeach him. Article 2, Section 4, the House brings it to the floor. Then the Senate lays it down. Next thing you know, they settle the score. Impeach him. Go to house.gov, spread the love. Go to house.gov, spread the love. Go to house.gov, spread the love. 1, 2, 3, impeach him. Save the Republic. Save democracy. Save humanity. Save yourself. His appointees are incompetent. His rhetoric is ridiculous and ludicrous. He's a vengeful, petty, spiteful man, and he's so vain he has a dang spray tan. Impeach him. Now he's got the nuclear codes. The nuclear codes, this ain't a joke anymore. Impeach him. The Donald is a dangerous man. Let's use the Constitution to take a stand. Impeach him. Article 2, Section 4, the House brings it to the floor. Then the Senate lays it down. Next thing you know, they settle the score. Impeach him. Go to house.gov, spread the love. Go to house.gov, spread the love. Go to house.gov, spread the love. 1, 2, 3, impeach Impeachment! Save the Republic. Save democracy. Save humanity. Save yourself.